Saturday mornings in Manhattan federal court are supposed to be hollow, empty halls, locked rooms, and forgotten echoes. A courthouse on a weekend is like a cathedral after midnight, silent by design. But on this morning, long before the city even yawned awake, that silence fractured. The Southern District of New York unlocked its doors for one man. Not for a dignitary, not for a federal emergency, but for Sean "Diddy" Combs, who just weeks earlier stood in the same building promising the court he would rebuild his life. He did not arrive today as the mogul the world knew. He arrived as inmate Combs, escorted in chains, flanked by U.S. Marshals, his reputation dragging behind him like a shadow too heavy to lift. Hours earlier, before the sky brightened, chaos erupted inside FCI Fort Dix. Officers doing a routine check noticed a sharp, sour odor drifting through a quiet corridor. It wasn't food. It wasn't cleaning supplies. It was something no guard expected to smell inside a federal cell. They traced the scent to a plastic storage bin tucked beneath Diddy's bunk. Inside was a small bottle, half-filled, poorly sealed, but unmistakable in its contents. The moment the cap twisted open, a wave of fermented alcohol struck the air like a confession. No inmate, especially not one under heightened observation, could claim this was an accident. Within minutes, the prison erupted. Sirens blared. Cells locked. Reports filled. The evidence, sealed and transported, reached the desk of Judge Aaron Subramanian just before dawn. This was the same judge who had looked at Diddy merely weeks ago and said with a rare softness, "This court expects transformation." Now that same judge read a violation so severe it threatened to swallow Diddy's entire future. And so, against federal custom, he ordered something almost never seen. An emergency Saturday hearing. No delays. No negotiations. No mercy pre-promised. Inside the transport van to Manhattan, Diddy kept his eyes down, wrists cuffed against his lap, the cold metal biting into his skin. The gravity of what a single bottle could do began sinking into him like ice. He had spent decades controlling rooms, industries, careers. Yet now he sat powerless while a mistake made in loneliness traveled faster than he could outrun it. When he arrived at the courthouse, the building buzzed with an energy that didn't belong to a weekend morning. Reporters rushed toward barricades. Helicopters hovered overhead. Camera flashes lit the marble steps like lightning. The whole world had awakened to a single headline. Diddy caught with contraband alcohol, emergency court hearing called. And inside the packed courtroom, journalists, legal analysts, and even old acquaintances from the industry watched him enter. He looked smaller than they remembered, not physically, but in presence, in aura. The judge entered moments later, robes sweeping behind him like a storm. No one breathed, because this wasn't just a disciplinary meeting. This was the moment that could turn a 4-year sentence into something far darker, something permanent. Diddy lifted his eyes only once. Just once. What he saw in Judge Subramanian's expression wasn't anger. It was disappointment. A kind of disappointment that feels sharper than punishment. And before a single argument was made, before a lawyer spoke a word, Diddy felt it. A cold truth rising in his chest. He might not be walking out of this courtroom the same man who walked in, but the bottle was only the beginning. What the prosecution uncovered next would shake the entire courtroom and destroy any hope Diddy still held. The courtroom felt different that morning, too full, too heavy, too aware of itself. Every person seated inside seemed to understand that this wasn't just another celebrity scandal. This was a man's future being dissected under fluorescent lights. When Diddy took his seat beside his attorney, Mark Agnafilo, he barely lifted his eyes. The cuffs around his wrists reflected the courtroom lights like tiny mirrors, catching every camera flash that dared intrude. For the first time in decades, he wasn't performing. He wasn't controlling the narrative. He was just waiting. The prosecution rose first. No theatrics, no raised voice, just a chilling certainty. The lead prosecutor opened a thick folder marked with a red tab. Inside were the findings from Fort Dix. "Your Honor," he began, each word measured, "what we have here is not a misunderstanding or a moment of carelessness. What we have is a deliberate violation, a violation committed by an inmate fully aware of his restrictions." He placed a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside it, the small bottle sat quietly, but the room reacted as if a bomb had been dropped. A wave of whispers rippled through the seats. Cameras clicked. Someone gasped. Agnifilo stiffened. He knew they were starting strong. The prosecutor continued, "This is a level 100 violation, the most severe category of misconduct within the federal prison system." Diddy didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened, only for a moment, only enough to betray fear. The judge took the evidence sheet, his glasses perched low on his nose. He flipped through the documents slowly, too slowly. Each turn of a page felt like a nail sliding into place. Photos, officer reports, timestamp logs, chemical tests confirming high ethanol content. Every detail boxed Diddy in tighter. Then the prosecutor introduced the next piece of evidence, a USB drive held inside another sealed pouch. An officer stepped forward to authenticate it. "This," the prosecutor said, "is surveillance footage from the night of November 7th, the night the bottle was discovered." Agnifilo raised a hand. "Your Honor, we request a chance to review the footage in private before it is shown." "Denied." The judge's voice cut him off before he could finish. The monitors flickered to life, the room dimmed. The footage played. Grainy, black and white and silent, yet devastating. It showed Diddy sitting on his bunk. Another inmate approached. A small object exchanged hands. Diddy shifted his storage container, the same one where the bottle was later found. No dramatic gestures. No secret signals. Just a simple movement that suddenly carried the weight of a lifetime. The prosecutor paused the footage at the exact moment the object, small and bottle-shaped, was visible near Diddy's hand. "This," he said, voice steady, "directly undermines any claim of innocence the defense intends to raise." Agnifilo shot up, voice tense. "This proves nothing. It does not show the contents, does not prove intent." But Judge Subramanian silenced him with a raised hand. "No," the judge said calmly, "but it does show opportunity." Those 6 words hit harder than any shouting could have. Diddy closed his eyes for a moment, a brief, helpless blink, like a man trying to escape the truth even for a second. The officer who found the bottle testified next. His voice was steady, trained, emotionless. He described the odor. He described the bottle. He described Diddy's reaction. "Not shock," the officer said. "Not confusion. A quiet acceptance." The room shivered. And then came the moment that changed everything. The bottle, the officer added, was wrapped inside a sweatshirt with Mr. Combs's initials stitched into the fabric. A collective gasp sucked the air from the courtroom. Diddy's shoulders dropped. His breathing hitched. For the first time, fear showed in his eyes, and just when it seemed the evidence couldn't get worse, the prosecution revealed a discovery that made the courtroom erupt in disbelief. The tension inside the courtroom swelled like a storm that refused to break. People shifted in their seats, glancing between the judge, the prosecution, and the man sitting shackled at the defense table. Diddy kept his head low, but the tremor in his fingers betrayed him. He knew the evidence was mounting faster than his lawyer could knock it down. Then the prosecution called forward another officer, this one carrying a binder, so thick it could have been mistaken for a case file in a murder trial. The officer set it on the evidence table with a heavy thud. The sound alone made people flinch. The prosecutor stepped beside it, opened to the first section, and spoke with the calm of someone who knew the next chapter of this hearing would hit like a punch. Your Honor, this portion details the secondary cell search conducted after the discovery of the bottle. Agnifilo tensed. He glanced at Diddy, whispering something under his breath, something urgent. Diddy didn't respond. The prosecutor lifted a series of photographs and placed them onto the courtroom screens. The images, simple yet horrifying in implication, filled every monitor. A set of folded bedsheets with faint, sticky stains. A food container with residue smeared across the lid. A towel rolled unusually tight, stuffed behind the bunk. A second bottle cap with no matching bottle. Each photo carried a timestamp. Each one painted a picture that looked less like a single mistake and more like a pattern. A murmur rose from the gallery. A reporter whispered, "This looks like a system." Someone else muttered, "He was making it." Judge Subramanian leaned forward slightly, almost involuntarily. The prosecutor continued. Officers also documented granulated sugar beneath the storage container and discarded fruit scraps in the cell's trash. The reaction was instant. Small gasps, quiet swears, exchanged glances. Because sugar and fruit weren't just ingredients. They were proof. Diddy's attorney pushed forward, his voice cracking at the edges. Your Honor, this is circumstantial. Contamination is possible. Other inmates could have. But the prosecution didn't even look at him. Instead, they flipped to a signed statement from an inmate who lived 3 doors down from Diddy. The prosecutor read it aloud. "I seen Combs getting things from dudes in the kitchen. Apples, sugar, soda bottles. Everybody knew he was making his own mix." The courtroom reacted like the floor had dropped out. A wave of whispers thundered through the gallery. One reporter's pen slipped from her hand. Diddy clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the table, chest rising and falling faster now. But it wasn't over. The prosecution then lifted a sealed evidence pouch containing a torn scrap of notebook paper, folded, creased, and worn at the edges. "We found this hidden under the mattress," an officer testified. The prosecutor slid it onto the screen. Everyone leaned forward. On the paper, in rushed handwriting, was a list. Apples 3. Sugar extra. Fanta keep hidden. Night only. No guards. The room froze solid. Agnifilo didn't speak. Couldn't speak. The judge stared at the note for a long, heavy moment. The kind of moment where disappointment hardens into something irreversible. He finally set the note down and looked directly at Diddy. "Intent," the judge said quietly. "Planning, deliberate misconduct." Diddy looked up, eyes shining, not from anger but from something more painful. "Defeat." A single tear escaped before he wiped it away with the back of his hand. Because now the room understood. This wasn't about stress. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a mistake. It was a blueprint. But just when the courtroom thought they'd heard the worst of it, the prosecution unveiled something far more damning, a video that would break Diddy's composure for the first time. The courtroom lights dimmed again, but this time the atmosphere shifted into something almost suffocating. Everyone could feel it. The prosecutors weren't done, not even close. And if the handwritten recipe shook the room, what came next would shatter it. A new monitor flickered to life behind the judge. The prosecutor stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, voice steady as stone. "Your Honor, the government will now present digital footage recovered from the cell block, time-stamped shortly before the initial discovery." Diddy stiffened. Agnifilo whispered sharply, "Don't react, keep your eyes down." But it was too late. Everyone was already watching him. Then the video began. Grainy gray cold. A camera angled down the corridor, capturing the row of cells in the dead of night. In the lower corner of the screen inside his assigned unit, Diddy sat on the edge of his bunk. Not packing, not nervous, calm, almost casual. Next to him on the floor sat a small plastic bottle. No hiding. No attempt to cover it. Just sitting there. A collective inhale rippled through the courtroom. The footage continued. Diddy unscrewed the cap, lifted the bottle, took a sip, wiped his mouth on his sleeve. No hesitation. No fear of being caught. No remorse. Just a man acting like no one was watching. The prosecutor paused the frame right as Diddy lowered the bottle. "This," he said, "is voluntary consumption of contraband alcohol." Diddy's entire body trembled, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough that even the guards beside him shifted in subtle discomfort. Agnifilo jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this video lacks context. There is no proof the liquid is alcoholic." But the judge cut him off instantly. "Counselor, the chemical test confirms the contents of the seized bottle. The footage shows the defendant drinking from a bottle found inside his cell. The connection is clear." The room fell silent. Even Agnifilo sank down, defeated. But the prosecution wasn't finished. The next clip loaded. Another angle, another timestamp. This one just hours earlier. It showed Diddy whispering to an inmate through the bars, passing a towel-wrapped object between them. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Was that more alcohol? He was distributing something. He really did this. Agnifilo slammed a hand on the table. Objection, speculation. The judge didn't even glance at him. This court knows what it is seeing. And now the final crack appeared in Diddy's composure. His shoulders shook. His eyes glistened. His breathing turned shallow, each inhale sounding tighter, harder, like his body refused to accept the reality unfolding around him. A single tear slid down the side of his face, but he wiped it away fast, as if embarrassed to let the world witness his unraveling. The judge slowly leaned forward. "Mr. Combs," he said, voice low but resonant, "this is not addiction. This is defiance, a calculated absence of accountability." Those words hit harder than any accusation. The prosecutor stepped forward and placed one final piece onto the bench. A timeline. Everything aligned. When ingredients were traded. When the bottle was prepared. When the hallway was quiet. When the footage captured consumption. When the stash was hidden. When officers discovered everything. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't stress. It wasn't loss of control. It was a pattern. Diddy finally looked up, eyes defeated, face pale, hands trembling. Everyone in the room could see it. He understood now. This wasn't just a hearing. This was the beginning of his collapse, but no one in the courtroom knew the prosecution still had one last bombshell, an internal memo that would send the judge's disappointment into full-blown outrage. The courtroom had already absorbed more than anyone expected: videos, photos, testimony, timelines. But somehow the prosecution managed to make the air even heavier. A deputy stepped forward carrying a slim, sealed folder. It wasn't thick. It wasn't dramatic. But the second it appeared, the entire atmosphere shifted. Judge Subramanian noticed immediately. "What is this?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor," the prosecutor replied, "this is an internal memo from Fort Dix. It was filed during the investigation, and it concerns Mr. Combs specifically." The judge opened it. The silence was instant. As his eyes moved down the first page, the color in his face didn't change, but something in his posture did. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw twitched, his lips pressed into a thin line. Everyone knew that look. It was the expression of a judge realizing things were far worse than he'd anticipated. He read aloud the first bold heading. Ongoing contraband pattern, high-risk inmate flag. The gallery gasped. Even reporters, trained to remain neutral, shifted forward in their seats. Diddy froze. His hands, already trembling, went still as stone. Agnifilo looked blindsided. Your Honor, we were not informed of this memo. We object to its admission without prior review. The judge raised a hand, ending the objection before it even formed. The prosecutor continued. The memo documents behaviors observed over the past 3 weeks that suggest an escalating pattern of manipulation, bartering, and influence building within the inmate population. Whispers shot across the room. Influence building. The one word that hit Diddy like fire. The memo detailed unusual nighttime movements between units, repeated food exchanges involving kitchen workers, multiple interactions with inmates under disciplinary review, guards nodding attempts to establish autonomy in the housing unit. Then came the line that made Diddy's lawyer physically step back. Inmate Combs may be attempting to rebuild a power structure inside the facility. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Power structure inside a federal prison. The implication was devastating. Diddy's chest rose sharply. His eyes widened, not in anger but in humiliation. That single line, the suggestion that he was trying to reclaim control, that old instinct for influence, felt like a knife. His entire career had been about power. Now that concept was being used against him. The judge exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. Mr. Combs, he said, voice heavy with disappointment, this is not the pattern of a man trying to rehabilitate. This is the pattern of a man trying to bend a system to his will. Diddy's lips parted slightly. He whispered, "That's not true." But the words collapsed in his throat before forming. The prosecutor wasn't finished. "These aren't guesses," he said. "These are documented incidents recorded by staff, and when paired with the alcohol operation, they establish not just misconduct." He paused. "But intent." The judge sat back, eyes locked onto Diddy with a mixture of sorrow and frustration. Agnifilo tried again, voice rising with desperation. "Your Honor, these are interpretations. The memo is speculative." But the judge slammed his palm lightly on the bench. "Enough." The word echoed like a gunshot. He turned to Diddy. "When you stood in this courtroom on October 3rd, you told me you understood the gravity of your situation. You told me you were prepared to change." His voice sharpened. "But this memo indicates the opposite." Diddy swallowed hard, eyes glassy. The gallery watched a man who once commanded entire industries, now shrinking under the weight of consequences he could no longer escape. The judge lowered the memo and spoke softly, too softly. "Mr. Combs, this hearing is no longer about alcohol." A pause. "It's about who you chose to be behind those walls." Just when the courtroom thought the prosecution had fired its final shot, the doors opened with a new witness, and their testimony would send Diddy into visible panic. Just as the judge placed the internal memo aside, ready to speak, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade. Every head turned. Even Judge Subramanian paused mid-breath. A U.S. Marshal entered, carrying a sealed envelope stamped urgent, Fort Dix Internal AFFAIRS. He looked tense, too tense. He marched straight to the judge and leaned in, whispering something only the bench could hear. Whatever it was, it wiped the last traces of neutrality from the judge's face. Diddy straightened instinctively. Agnifilo's hand tightened around his pen. Reporters poised like hunters sensing movement. The judge opened the envelope and froze for a moment, just long enough for an electric dread to spread through the room. Then he began reading. "New witness testimony has been collected. Multiple inmates observed Mr. Combs exchanging items believed to be materials for producing alcohol. The room erupted. Gasps. Shouts. One reporter visibly mouthed, "Oh my God." Diddy went completely still. His eyes darted from the judge to the prosecution, to the envelope, to the floor. A man shaking without shaking. Agnifilo bolted up from his chair. "Your Honor, these are inmates we're talking about, unreliable, inconsistent, manipulated by prison politics." But the judge cut him off sharply. "These statements were taken under supervision by 3 separate officers. They are signed, verified, and consistent." Agnifilo's mouth snapped shut. And now the prosecution stepped forward with the kind of confidence that only comes when the final thread is about to be pulled. "Your Honor, these testimonies indicate the alcohol production was not a one-time incident. It was ongoing for at least 2 weeks. The gallery gasped. Even Diddy inhaled sharply, a sound like someone being pulled underwater. The judge read the next line aloud. "Witness reports note Mr. Combs receiving sugar packets from kitchen staff." Diddy's eyes squeezed shut. Another line. "Another inmate observed unusual odors coming from his cell after lights out." He lowered his head further. Another line. "Mr. Combs consistently draped towels across the lower half of his bunk, believed to hide ongoing activity." He swallowed hard. Each sentence was a hammer, each detail chipping away at what remained of his defense. But then came the blow that finally broke him. Multiple inmates report Mr. Combs distributing materials and instructions related to alcohol production. The room shook with disbelief. He wasn't just making alcohol. He was teaching others. Diddy's body jerked barely but unmistakably. His breathing turned shallow, strained. The judge watched him with something far worse than anger. Disappointment. Not in the crime, but in the pattern. The deliberate choice. The refusal to change. The prosecutor spoke again, her tone a quiet scalpel. "Your Honor, at this point, the question is no longer whether Mr. Combs violated the rules. The question is how far he intended to take this operation." Diddy lifted his head, eyes wide, glassy, pleading for something, anything. But when the judge looked back at him, there was nothing left in his expression that resembled mercy. Agnifilo placed a hand on Diddy's shoulder. "Don't speak," he whispered, "no matter what happens next." But even the attorney's voice trembled. Because everyone in that courtroom felt it. The fate of Sean Diddy Combs had just crossed a line. And there was no walking it back. And yet, as devastating as the testimonies were, the prosecution still had one final document, a discovery so severe it would push the judge to the edge of an irreversible decision. The courtroom had grown so quiet that even the hum of the lights seemed loud. Every eye locked onto the prosecution's table as they reached for one last document, thin, unassuming, yet wrapped in a kind of finality that made the air feel colder. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "Internal Affairs has submitted additional findings. This will be the last piece of evidence we present." The judge nodded, though his expression had shifted from stern to something graver, something that said he was already beginning to accept the direction this hearing was moving. The prosecutor handed over the paper. Judge Subramanian read it once, eyes narrowing, then twice, posture stiffening. Then he set it down slowly, as though the weight of the page was heavier than the wood beneath it. He spoke carefully. "During a follow-up inspection, officers recovered a hidden compartment behind a loose panel inside Mr. Combs's cell." Whispers burst through the room before the judge even reached the next line. "A contraband compartment behind a wall panel." The judge continued. "Inside this compartment, Officers found a plastic container with fermented residue, a makeshift filtering cloth, and a second bottle cap matching the one previously seized. Diddy's head snapped up. Pure panic flashed through his eyes. Agnifilo immediately stood. "Your Honor, we dispute this. There is no proof my client constructed that compartment." But the judge's gaze silenced him. "Counselor," he said, voice low, "if these items were found where this report indicates, Mr. Combs was not simply consuming contraband. He was manufacturing it." A deafening wave washed over the gallery, gasps, murmurs, even a few quiet cries of disbelief. Reporters were already typing furiously. Diddy, who had been shrinking slowly throughout the hearing, now looked like a man whose soul had cracked open. His breathing hitched, and he gripped the table as though he might fall out of his chair. Agnifilo pressed a hand onto his back. "Sean, stay with me, don't break now." But Diddy was breaking. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the kind of silent collapse that only happens when a man sees the last door in front of him close. The prosecution stepped forward once more, but their voice softened, almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. "Your Honor, the totality of evidence shows a deliberate, coordinated, and sustained pattern of misconduct. This is not a lapse. This is an operation." The judge closed the file altogether. That sound, paper meeting wood, felt like the slam of a cell door. He folded his hands. "Mr. Combs," he said, each syllable heavy, "before this court proceeds, I want you to understand the magnitude of what has transpired here today." Diddy's eyes lifted, glassy, trembling. "You were given structure, boundaries, a chance to serve your sentence with dignity, yet the evidence shows not only violation but intention, planning, leadership within a prohibited operation." His voice hardened. "The court cannot and will not ignore the severity of this." Agnifilo whispered frantically, "Your Honor, please, mercy, context, mental strain." But the judge raised his palm. "No more." A hush consumed the courtroom. Judge Subramanian straightened in his chair, the weight of the moment tightening the space around him. "Sean Combs," he said, the name echoing in the chamber, "in light of the overwhelming evidence, the repeated violations, and the breach of this court's trust, this court is compelled to take decisive action." Diddy's chest rose sharply. His knuckles went white. The judge leaned forward, eyes locked directly onto him. "Your federal sentence is hereby escalated to a permanent term of incarceration." A cry rang out in the gallery. A reporter choked on her breath. Diddy's face drained of all color. With no eligibility for appeal, reduction, or future review. Gasps ripped through the courtroom, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Diddy shook his head slowly. "No, no, no, please." His voice cracked, raw and breaking. But the judge's gaze did not waver. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck, a sound that felt like the end of an era. U.S. Marshals surged forward, gripping Diddy's arms as his legs trembled beneath him. He whispered desperately, "This can't be real, please, please." But reality didn't flinch. The courtroom watched silently as a man who once ruled the world was led away in chains. No longer a mogul, no longer an icon, but an inmate facing the rest of his life behind concrete and steel. As the doors closed behind him, every camera, every reporter, every whisper carried the same unspoken truth. A single bottle had destroyed an empire.